Hey everybody, my name's Private Reese. So we're gonna have to cut all this audio out because it sucks. But fuck it, let's just go badass. I am Private Reese from the future. The story is called The Terminator. Let's fucking roll. All right, so in the beginning, we're gonna get to some history because you're just gonna have to know it. So we're gonna start with the history of Upper Canada. Upper Canada, if you don't know what it really is kind of southern Ontario. It's basically that part of Canada that's most populated now. Lower Canada was Quebec, pretty much all the French kind of speaking people over there. After the War of 1812, things kind of settled down. The indigenous peoples of the area, that would really be the Mississauga of the Credit, the Algonquin, different members of kind of the Cree, really a ton. I'm not going to get into all of the different ramifications of the history of Upper Canada, only to say that really things started to get going, after the War of 1812. But, it was kind of still wild times up until the rebellion of 1837, the Upper Canada Rebellion. So yeah, so Upper Canada. Today, Upper Canada, or the kind of the area that we're looking at, this is Toronto. So Toronto, if you don't know, it's where Drake's from. Uh, Maple Leafs. Yeah, that's Toronto. So, anyways, about 70 kilometers. I don't know how many freedom units that is. Northwest of Toronto is the area that we're kind of going to look at today. Well, here, uh, this kind of area in kind of between Orangeville and Erin and Bellefontaine and Caledon Village. So let's get down to it. Here we go. And we're going to talk about the boring 20s to the roaring 20s. So, after the War of 1812, things start to open up. Immigrants really start coming over, right? So, in this area that we're looking at, you get a lot of Scottish immigrants, people coming into from the United Kingdom, primarily, that are moving their way inland and claiming land that, they're kind of, I guess, like Sooners, right? Or Boomers or whatever those guys in Oklahoma are. Anyways, everybody's going to get like 200 acres, so everybody's going for it, right? So fast forward about 100 years. So now we're in a tiny kind of little village within this kind of area, and it's called Melville. And it's basically a kind of an intersection today. But back in, the hard scrabble late 1800s, it was a tough place to farm. So a guy by the name of Arthur Houston, he left the farm. He decided he kind of wanted out, and he headed down to Toronto because there was a railway line that kind of went through the town. So he was able to jump on the railway, get down to Toronto, and make himself a name in vaudeville. And actually, he became quite big in vaudeville. It was his cousin, though, that was a little bit more famous. But I'll get to him in a second. So, Arthur's famous, has a nice time, got some cash, goes back to the homestead in Melville. It's kind of, up the Credit River, just south of Orangeville, and decides to change the farmland into a private golf course for himself, right? Into this golf course, into this retreat, as it is. I think it was called River Home, or something along those lines. Anyways, nice place. His cousin, who's from Toronto, comes up all the time. Basically, it becomes their family's estate, kind of summer house, as it were. Nice house on it too. It's all fallen down now. It's kind of dilapidated. I'm sure maybe somebody lives in it. I don't know, but it's owned by some Gulf North property. Anyways, the cousin of Arthur is a little bit more well known. That'd be Walter Houston. Now, Walter Houston was a big time actor eventually in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, and he won, I think, 4 Academy Awards. Now, the house up in the golf course is on a nice river. it's all hills and it's a nice river valley that it cuts through, right? It's kind of really the head of, where the river kind of starts. And there's a big lake around here. And the river flows all the way down to Lake Ontario. And so the Houstons would come up, and they'd come up from, Los Angeles and all these sorts of places. And it was kind of, if you're from, Canada and Southern Ontario, you might know Muskoka. It was basically the Muskoka area before there was Muskoka. And all these, so it was quite, a big deal that these very famous people were coming up. That would also go into eventually the next generation, which would be somebody that's really famous, which is John Huston. Now, John Huston is a very famous director. Really one of the truly all-time great directors in film, and made a ton of, worked with Bogart multiple times. Did the Misfits, did Moby Dick, where he kind of was able to kind of pull off something of, kind of what the Fondas were able to do was in, Treasure of Sierra Madre, because in Treasure of Sierra Madre, he also was able to work with his father here, Walter, and everybody was getting Academy Awards. So it was a kind of a big deal, right? So around this time, around the 50s, the Houstons now get rid of the property. Now, up until that point, Bing Crosby was coming to play golf, and Elizabeth Taylor was coming to play. So it was still a huge, huge draw in this area. This basically kind of crossroads. Um, you know, for them, it was, the local area really knew about it. So other people that we may know or the Houstons are, Angelica, obviously Morticia. There's my favorite one here, Danny Houston, from I always want to say it's Succession, but I guess it's Hillbilly. The Hillbilly Succession is Yellowknife, or not Yellowknife, Yellowstone. And I guess there's another one of them. I guess it's an actor, but I'm not sure really who he is. Anyways, moving forward, how does this get to what we're even talking about? Why am I coming here from the future to warn you about James Cameron? Well, here's a map from 18, I don't know. I forget what year we downloaded it from. But if you can look in the kind of circle up there, you might be able to make out the name James Cameron. Now, this area around here is where the railway came through, and it was starting to kind of really get built up. And the Camerons, well, they've been here since 1820 in this area that we're looking at. So, Wikipedia on him: James Francis Cameron was born August 16th, 55. Kapuskasing. Kapuskasing is in like northern Ontario, just so you know. To Philip Cameron, an electrical engineer, nice guy. And Shirley Nilo, an artist and nurse. Oh, well, it's some nice working class people. He is the first of five children. Oh, big family. His paternal great 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 grandfather immigrated from Balquhidder, whatever it is, Scotland in 1825. Cameron spent summers on his grandfather's farm in southern Ontario. This is all as per Wikipedia, because we can't really bring stuff back for the future all that much. So, also, the villain in the movie Titanic is named Cal Hockley. Now, this is widely known when the movie came out that Cameron made a bit of a tip of the hat to this area that he spent on his grandfather's farm. Uh, you know, thus naming the villain in the movie Cal Hockley after Calvin Hockley. So everybody loves Billy Zane. Here's the thing: from where Cameron's kind of spent this, summers on the farm, to where the Houston estate was, it's just upriver. It's like about 2.5 kilometers, which again, I think is maybe a mile in your freedom units. That's not that far away. Now, James Cameron, when he was going to his grandparents' farm, was probably going to be somewhere in his, well, childhood, right? So if he was born in 54, I think, and the Houstons sold it in 54, well, by the time he became a little kid, he'd still be hearing about all the legendary parties in Hollywood and those sorts of things. This would have to have shaped him in some sort of way. Now, here's where it gets, you're going to have to just go with me. In 1963, a 10-year-old James Cameron would have probably seen The Incredible Journey. The Incredible Journey is one of Walt Disney's best movies, and anybody that is from that area that James Cameron spent his time on that farm would absolutely have known that it was partially filmed up around there. In 1966, John Huston directs The Bible. It's an epic story. It's a huge movie. And in 1966, he would have been what? 12, James Cameron? Maybe 13? I can't remember. Regardless, any kid with an explosion of creativity and an interest in movies, especially one of John Huston's, who's just from upriver, this movie would probably have a great influence on. Now, Jim Cameron's always talked about the influence of 2001: A Space Odyssey on his movie making. That's not something that's no big secret that I'm letting out of the bag today. However, another one that people might not think about is The Man Who Would Be King in 1975, another John Huston film. Now, here's the thing. James Cameron doesn't really talk about John Huston. Now, if you were a kid who was growing up on the family farm, even if it was just summers and Christmases, wouldn't you be very interested in the very famous director that used to summer just up the river? I think you would. I think John Huston is a bigger influence on James Cameron than anybody's ever really looked at. Now, where did the inspiration from this idea come from? Well, James Cameron put out this book, or this book put out for James Cameron, I don't know. But all the interviews that he looks at and he talks about it, talked about how during his childhood, this area or this time period of his childhood, those kind of 12 to, I guess, 10 to 25, was when he did tons of all of his sketching and drawing, because that's what he really was an artist. James Cameron is an artist when it comes to all of his sketching and arting. And he shows that in the movie Titanic, where he's the one that does all the sketching. Now, further to that, well, somebody tried to sue James Cameron over the idea of Avatar. And James Cameron basically said, well, listen, it is a Pocahontas story, it is a Fern Gully story, but all those stories are basically, native versus, Native Americans or Native indigenous people against settlers in a way, right? He said, you know what? I came up with this stuff when I was a kid. He said he's been kicking around these ideas since he was a child. It even used the prototypes of characters such as Ribisi's mining executive in earlier films like Aliens. Mining executives. Well, for that instance, corporate greed was personified by Paul Reiser. So he's using these kind of characters based off of stuff that he's really experienced much, much earlier as a child. Now, here's the thing. If you're going to come up with the villain and come up with the name for a villain and name him after a place that meant a lot to you, in this place, Calton Hockley, meant, that tip of the cap to the family farm that he grew up on. why wouldn't you do it with the hero as well? Here's the thing. He did. The truest lie that you can ever tell is by not saying anything at all. I suspected that by going and looking in the James Cameron's cemetery where his family settled, I would find his relatives. And I did. When you take a look in that cemetery for people that would be named, and because remember, his name's not Jack Dawson, it's John Dawson. I knew, just knew, you'd find a John Dawson in there. Now, here's the thing. Take a look at the date of birth and the date of death for James Cameron of I don't know what it is, Scotland. He died the 16th of April, 1913, which is like 1 year after Titanic. Man, here's the thing. If you were a very creative 14 or 15-year-old James Cameron, and you wanted to find some inspiration for the heritage that you had or the stories that you wanted to tell, maybe, just maybe, you go down the street to the cemetery and look to see who your ancestor was. And in this case, he's got the same name as you. Finding that inspiration and maybe finding it very funny that its death was a year after the Titanic, well, wouldn't that be something to kind of go, maybe that's where I'll kind of to tell a story. Well, I don't know. That's far too much of a stretch, to say James Cameron is gonna, go and kind of find inspiration, from a relative that died a year after the Titanic, right? So, anyways, I don't know though. Maybe he did though. Maybe he does go to the cemetery, look at it, and say, well, you know what? But who knows? We have to go find John Dawson then, right? See if there is something that if he's looking at this grave grave marker and seeing it that it's a year after Titanic, that yeah, then he would maybe see a John Dawson and go, oh, that's maybe the character I'm going to use, right? So I mean, here's the thing. You're not going to know until you go. So I go down to the cemetery. And I present you the real Jack Dawson. John Graham Dawson, born 1792 in County Monaghan, Ireland, which is just down the road, actually, from Belfast. Now, if you know where that is, you'll probably know that that's where the Titanic was built. But anyways, he died in 1874, which is around the time that our Jack Dawson would have been born. And he's buried here in the cemetery. So I had to go up to the cemetery. I had to find out. I had to look for Jack. And here's where the story comes up. Because if he is Jack Dawson, this is where it kind of starts to line up. Because here's the thing. If my theory is right, and that Jack Dawson was inspired by some sort of provenance of James Cameron watching John Huston's movie Noah's Ark or whatever it was, the Bible. Well, I don't know. That's just a bit flimsy at this point, right? But you start to kind of look at it that maybe if it is a guy And if James Cameron does really love the area, and that's where he's kind of coming up with the story, well, here's the thing. When James Cameron was 15, that's when the Noah's Ark movie came out. So I think he does see it, and I think it drives him to say, man, I'd love to make some sort of movie around that. Or possibly a different set. That he went to the gravesite, saw his grandfather's grave, saw that it was a year after Titanic, and thought, now I want to make a movie. And that Noah's Ark was the thing that really sealed it for him. That he said, nah, yeah, I could actually maybe pull this off. Because he saw John Huston, a legend from just upriver, do the same thing. So if you take a look at the the the, the similarities between the stories, the story starts at 15. You know, Jack Dawson's biography starts when he's 15 years old, which is when the same time with James Cameron would come up with the story. Jack Dawson's from Wisconsin, which is very, very similar in geography to the area in which Alton is located. He was born in 1894, which is the year that his ancestor died. He used to spend his summers or winters ice fishing on the lake. Now, just next to the Cameron land, fairly large lake where absolutely ice fishing would have taken place. He had fun in the outdoors and played around in the environment and basically kind of the same kind of backyards that James Cameron was spending time in. He makes a European friend, and I'm going to get to this one in a second, and sets off for California, just like James Cameron did at age 17 when his parents moved there. And he'd spent his time drawing girls on the pier on Santa Monica, something that Cameron actually did. And then he goes on Titanic. So it's my theory and my belief that Jack Dawson is actually an amalgamation of James Cameron's backstory in real life and the names of somebody in the cemetery, whether it be his own inspiration because his own great grandfather was the same name as him, or whether it was possibly within the vicinity there was a John Dawson or a Jack Dawson, and that was the name that stuck. So I went to the cemetery to look for myself. As you can see, here's the gravesite, and you can see the Camerons here of in this area of being here for a long period of time. And you can see actually just behind that kind of pillar one, there's a missing gravesite. Now, I'd love to kind of speculate that that's actually John Dawson because I did search throughout the entire place and I couldn't not find the grave marker for a John Dawson. He is listed as being buried in the cemetery, but I could not find the marker. But I thought, you know what? Who knows? I guess maybe that's just the name. It might have been there for him to see. It was at this point I turned around and I walked towards leaving the cemetery. You'll see here the next Cameron grave marker there is a big statuesque one here, and it's of Flora Cameron. And I was kind of looking at that and I thought, oh, that's kind of nice flora, flower, rose. Oh, maybe that's it. And as I walked down, I saw something. And maybe you'll notice it before I get there, but I gotta tell you, I really didn't see it until I almost was on it. But when I saw it, I almost fell down. Within 20 feet of James Cameron's grandfather's grave marker, headstone, is the headstone of the Titanic family. Its grave markers are next to that of the Romanix family. And I can tell you that if a 15-year-old James Cameron, in looking for some inspiration, went to visit his grandfather's grave and saw that he died 1 year after the Titanic did, and then turned around and also saw that the families of the romantic Titanics were there, I am absolutely 100% positive that he would make the connection that he should tell a story about Titanic in a romantic fashion. I know that sounds crazy, but it just makes logical sense. Now, seeing this, I did have to look around a little bit more. And there is a little bit more to this story. But for that, I'll wait till later and eventually finish off. But I can promise you that this isn't even the tip of the iceberg.